Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer, for bringing up legal precedent, too, because I failed to mention another case that came after Roe versus Wade, which actually remain three key things that we should keep in mind when doing or meddling with this subject matter at the state level or any level of regulation. The first is that women have the right to abort pre-viability without undue interference from the state. So that's pre-viability, which refers back to what I mentioned earlier about the trimesters, the 3 trimesters. And then the second, the state may restrict abortion post-viability, which is keeping people, families safe. And it would also, I would mention, and I know there's a few doctors and nurses in the room in our Senate, on our Senate floor, that you have some licenses that you have to keep to practice medicine or be a nurse, and you also have ethics that you have to and those are regulated by the state and the boards that we actually enforce. So there is level of regulation at that level. And thirdly, the state has a legitimate interest in protecting women's health and the life of the fetus. So there is an interest, certainly, and you have to go back to case law, but this is not case law. This is a law that we're passing. We're not talking about a woman who was prevented to have her legal right to abortion. She can go to the courts and plead her case in many instances. Right now we're talking about a law that we want to put on the books that actually interferes with a woman's right to reproductive health care. And Senator Drahenheim, I'm a business owner too, but we're not talking about a business. We're talking about health care. It's very different. A business gets regulated. Healthcare has its own way of being regulated. Like I mentioned, doctors are licensed. Nurses have their own compacts and their own ethical standards to abide with, and it's a very regulated industry in our state. I would imagine people who are performing surgery and procedures like abortion are highly skilled at what they do, and they have to be trained to do it safely. So, Mr. President and Senator Drahenheim, this is not a business we're talking about. We're talking about healthcare, the fundamental right for women's reproductive care and reproductive health care. So I would like I would argue that it's not the business of the state to license my body or license what I do with my body as long as I abide by current precedent. So yes, members, there is a law of the land, and if someone wants to change that, it has to be done by a case, not by legislation. Although we can argue that this law, if it's indeed signed into law, would be a violation of that precedent, and it would go through the courts. But we know more, we know better, that again, abortions are rare and safe. And in the committee hearings we've had, and I wish all of you served on the Health and Human Services, because these are deep conversations about really difficult decisions some families have to make for the life of the mother or for the life of their fetus or their baby, and they are not taken lightly. And sometimes we say, oh, licensing is the way to go, but then we'll add regulations to what licensing means, and we add additional burdens. And members, it's a slippery slope. And I also believe that this area does merit some additional conversation with testifiers and stakeholders like we have, and in a scientific way, with doctors that go and work on this and deal with very difficult circumstances where they have to make a decision. And if we have to go to statute to make that decision instead of saving that patient, I think we're putting law before logic. And we have to be very careful when we do that. And I trust my doctors, my OBGYN, which without her and without my reproductive care doctor, I wouldn't have my 2 children. And that's fact. But then what you think of where life begins, without knowing what I went through to have life begin, are 2 different universes. And I just think we should be really careful when we start walking this line of trying to protect life without really understanding, or without really understanding all the grays in this particular subject matter. And for me, again, it's personal, and I just don't believe there's a role in the government and in the Minnesota Senate and in this bill to try to tell the woman where they can and cannot perform a legal abortion. So members, please vote green on this amendment.